Hello, my name is Wasim Ridwan, and I am going to be giving a presentation about my first experiences with my first citizen science project, and this project concerns the importance of plankton, and I'll also be talking about what I've learned about plankton in general. So, what exactly is citizen science? Citizen science is when ordinary people from the public, guided by professional scientists, help collect and analyze data from the real world. The efforts of everyone are then gathered to form a result relating to the scientist's research, like a community group project. So basically, everyone does their own little part of like a big project, and these smaller parts then accumulate into a result. So maybe like so let's say that the project is like writing the alphabet. One person may write A, another person writes B, C, and so on, and then that would be combined to form the whole alphabet. Pretty simple example there. So what exactly are plankton? Plankton are microorganisms that float freely along the ocean's currents. Phytoplankton are plankton that are like the plants of the ocean, capturing the sun's energy through photosynthesis. Zooplankton are akin to the animals living on land. Together they serve as the main food sources for most aquatic life forms. So as you can see, phytoplankton are pictured on the left and zooplankton are pictured on the right. Zooplankton in general tend to be bigger than phytoplankton, and that is going to be the plankton that we're focusing on in my citizen science project. Phytoplankton and CO2. Phytoplankton are also responsible for capturing CO2 and releasing it into the ocean. With CO2 being the main molecule contributing to the greenhouse gas crisis and there being 70 times more carbon in the ocean due to phytoplankton, their existence is crucial towards maintaining stable CO2 levels in the atmosphere. So since there's 70 times more carbon in the ocean, if all of the phytoplankton were to die and all of the carbon in the form of like oil were to be released from the ocean, that would be, of course, really, really bad. I mean, we already see how the effects of greenhouse gases right now are heating the planet up and causing more severe weather and climate change. And if all of that carbon in the ocean was released into the atmosphere and there was no phytoplankton to help capture it, well, things would be really bad for us. So that's why it's important to, make sure that they're all healthy. Plankton in the Earth's health. Furthermore, because of their importance to the food chain, plankton also serve as a marker for the health of Earth's oceans. If there's no plankton, then there's no source of energy for the ocean's ecosystems, which means underwater life would cease to exist. So like aside from like the severe climate implications of not having any phytoplankton to capture CO2 to, you know, continue the carbon cycle and stop too much CO2 from accumulating in the atmosphere, there also would be no ocean life if there were no plankton in general. No phytoplankton, no zooplankton means no food for any of the ocean's organisms. It'd be like if there was no, plants on land. Without any plants, nothing would be able to live. No animals would be able to live because their herbivores would die, and that means that also carnivores and omnivores would die as well. For my citizen science project, I participated in a project called Plankton Portal. The goal of this project was to try to classify the plankton in the given photos into the groups given. I only needed to provide my best guess for each plankton I saw, and my results would then be compiled and compared with others to form a result. So it's not like I had to be I had to really be super careful and be like looking at every single tiny little detail of what I would suspect is a plankton in a photo and to try and make sure I get the answer right. I just have to give my best guess based on like what I think. I don't have to spend like a ton of time trying to classify them. Of course, I should still try my best, but I don't have to worry or sweat it too much if I don't know what it is or if I think I'm about to get it wrong, because the researchers are going to be going off of the results of what the majority of people say. So if most people are saying the plankton is this sort of a species, then it's likely that will end up being classified like that. So basically, wisdom of the public. So now we're moving on to my experience with the citizen science project. The classification. I've taken a couple of screenshots of some of the images I've worked with to determine search for any plankton in the photo and then classify them into a specific species. And this is the first screenshot I'm given to work with. So as you can see, some screenshots are like this, where there's like nothing that you can really see in the photo. So it's pretty difficult to go ahead and like determine whether there's any plankton here. Another option you can give is like if there's no plankton in the photo. So this is like a perfect example of, I believe, when I said there was no plankton I could see. So because I can't see any plankton I can classify, I just said there was none. In this image, I found this plankton in the top left corner. I decided to classify this one as Solmeris because it seems to be very similar. It's round, and it's also got like these tentacles. And since it's got like a lot of them, it doesn't really seem like any of the rest of them. Since with a Medusa, it looks like the head is bigger on a Medusa, to be honest. And also, even though I can't really see the whole head though, so like I said, we're just giving our best guess here. So because of that, I decided to classify it as Sormlaris because I don't think the head looks big enough or matches like the head of a Medusa as much. So yeah. And these two images, I've taken two screenshots here to go ahead and show what I classified. So if you can go ahead and see the circled little organism here, you could probably match it with what you can see on the left side image. This organism, I decided to, it's really hard to see whether this is actually a plankton in general or if it's just a speck, but I guess that it was a plankton. I assumed that it was a round plankton without any tentacles, so none of the options particularly really matched what I was looking at here. That's something common theme that I've noticed a lot, is that I feel like a lot of the plankton I saw didn't really match well with any of the images. And so I just assumed that, so I just chose the lobate because I felt like that was like the closest option, like, because I feel like it's also kind of difficult to classify the plankton since you might not get like the perfect angle of the plankton since it might be positioned differently than what the image is showing. So they've given like also drawn images to help you give a shape of what you're really looking at, but like I said, it doesn't always help because the plankton may not be positioned exactly like the photo, and if it's like in a completely different direction where you can't even see its body, then it becomes very difficult to classify. For this third screenshot here, I have classified this one as a Medusa. As you can see, this one was kind of similar to the one that I showed two screenshots ago. But since I can see the full head, I feel like this looks quite similar to Medusa, lots of tentacles. But the head, since I can see the whole thing, I just assumed it was Medusa because, it seems like it has this sort of, I don't know what I would describe it, it looks like a sort of star sort of pattern on the top of the Medusa, whereas the Solmeris doesn't really seem to have as much of a rounded cap on the top. It seems more flat on the top, so because of that, I classified it as Medusa. Of course, maybe it's a Solmeris. I could be wrong based on what other people think, but like I said, we're just giving our best guess here. Some of the screenshots, as you can see, are much easier to see if there's actually plankton in them. As you can see, it's very obvious there's a plankton in this one, but some of them are very, very difficult to actually see any plankton, and even if there's any plankton there to begin with. Like I said, there might not be any plankton in the image they give. And then for this last screenshot that I'm showing here, I don't want to show every single screenshot because, I classified a lot of images, but going through every single one would make this video way too long. So yeah, and then here is another example of an image that shows a plankton, what I think is a plankton, that's difficult to classify. I'm not really sure if this is actually a plankton. Even when I zoomed up, I couldn't really see it matching any of the images we got, so I just assumed it was a plankton, but it's unidentifiable. It may not be anything, it could just be like a little blob there that's not actually a plankton, but I just did assume that it was a plankton and that I just couldn't match it with any of them, so I selected unidentifiable. Of course, like I said, for screenshots that look like they have no plankton, you can also just not select anything and then move on, and that will, classify as there being no plankton. So yeah. And then, so basically that process continued on for quite a few more pictures. It was just a matter of looking at the image, looking at the details of the plankton, trying to determine what I can really see and see if it matches the images that they've given, which more often than not is quite difficult to do because, like I said, it's difficult to go ahead and see the angle that the plankton is supposed to be aligned with in terms of like the image that they give. So if it's like facing the wrong way in comparison to like the image they give, you might not be able to recognize it as that plankton and you might see it as something else. And also some of the screenshots are also like look really zoomed out, or the plankton look really, really small, so you can barely even see them in the screenshot in the first place, which makes them even more difficult to classify. But like I said, this is a citizen science project, so of course that means that everyone that participates is going to have their guesses accumulated into one answer, and the researchers, I guess, will take that as a form of guidance to classify each plankton that they see in an image. In terms of my overall thoughts for my first citizen science project, I thought it was, although the whole process itself was pretty easy in terms of like, what I was supposed to do, I just had to classify and such. If I were to go ahead and say, I think that one thing that could definitely be done to improve it would be to make it more engaging in a way because, it would be really good if we could get children and also other people that are like, interested in doing help for the planet to participate in this. But like overall, I found the whole process quite bland and boring overall because it was just, guessing what something looked like. And since all the images are in black and white, there's a lot less brain stimulation going on there. So I feel like if there's a way to like maybe make the whole classification project more exciting, that would probably be a good idea. Like maybe add some like artificial color to it to make it easier to see what's going on, or maybe like adding like, you know, little milestone rewards like in comparison to like other people. Like for example, like how with Kahoot they would have like points that show your comparison to other people. It would be nice if there was maybe like there could also be like a leaderboard to go ahead and show how many images you've classified, but I'm not really sure how I would specifically improve it, but like I said, I just think that if we want more and more people to participate in like these citizen science projects to help further research, they're going to have to be more engaging to capture the average user's attention because most people aren't going to really want to sit there classifying images that are black and white with plankton that are very hard to see rather than like over like, being on their phone, reading a book, playing sports or something. So yeah. I learned a lot about plankton throughout this whole project, honestly. Like, I already had some prior information about plankton, since, I knew, like, plankton makes up, like, a lot of the Earth's organisms, since, the Earth is 70% ocean, so I knew it would be, like, a lot, but to go ahead, like, and see more research about them, like, being so important that they're, like, the foundation of ocean life, and that without them, there would be no life in the ocean, like, that really solidified their importance in my mind. And it's even more interesting when you think about it. When you think about it more, you realize that the reason why so much carbon there is in the ocean is because of the fact that when organisms in the oceans die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, and so that carbon stays there. So, we have to depend on these, like, plankton, the phytoplankton specifically, to go ahead and, like, trap carbon in the ocean to slow the greenhouse gas process down. And if all of them were to die due to, like, climate change or like pollution or something like that, well, then that would be really bad for us, especially if people continue to burn oil and release those greenhouse gases into the air again. So we have to make sure that the plankton are always alive and well, which is what this project aims to do. By making sure that by classifying and seeing what sort of plankton are in an image, they'll be able to use this information to count how many plankton are still alive in certain areas to make sure the ocean's doing well. And so yeah, that's it for my project overall. Um, would I really, what would I rate this experience of citizen science? Gonna be honest, I'd probably rate it a 5 out of 10. It was 5 out of 10 because, the good part, it was simple. There was nothing like, it nailed the easy, you know, to get used to part of it down. Like, it's easy to get into, but the only thing is that -5 points because I don't think it would be very engaging or exciting for the average person to want to participate. And if they're depending on the public to want to like help them out, I think they're going to have to make it more engaging or rewarding for the average person if they want to get them to participate. So yeah, thanks for watching.